So I guess the beginning of that slide sort of told you the business that we're in. We're in the business of content. Effectively, what the Walt Disney Company does is we produce content, all kinds of content, television content, motion picture content, mobile content, online content, and that effectively, I think, it's interesting to hear a lot of the other distributors and some of the technologists in the group yesterday speaking, but we're sort of on that other end of the spectrum. We're the people who actually create the content. So I point to this slide really to kind of illustrate the value chain as we see kind of the industry rolling out. On the left-hand side of your screen, you see the content producer. As we discussed, that's kind of the role that Disney plays. Then we have the programming, the programmer or the aggregator, and that's the person who assembles all the content and put all the content together. The third box is the box that probably a lot of you are familiar with, which is the distributor. And then, of course, the final box is the device or the specific piece of hardware that the consumer is using. I guess there's a couple of points I'd like to make. The first is, the box to the second box on the left, which is the role of the programmer or the aggregator, often overlooked, very critical. As we see the world of the media becoming more fragmented, more complex, more confusing, we find that the consumer is increasingly relying on looking for an aggregator or a brand to help them identify where they should be finding their content, where they should be looking for their content. How do I navigate through this very complicated world? And I think what the Walt Disney Company does so well is we help consumers find a comfortable place to identify and to find their content. In the case of kids programming, for example, it might be the Disney Channel. So when you put your kids in front of the Disney Channel, you know what kind of experience they're getting. In the United States, we have the ABC network. And again, that is it targets 18 to 49-year-olds with a slight skew towards women. Again, so the content that a person turns on when they turn on the ABC network, they know what they're going to get. ESPN is another one of our big brands. That is the authority on sports. So if you're a sports fan and you want to know what's happening in the World Cup or what's happening in rugby or what's happening in with the NBA Finals, you know who the authority and where to go and where to find that content. So at the Walt Disney Company, we spend a lot of time focusing on brands. We spend a lot of time thinking about how do we aggregate and how do we collect content and bundle them and put them into an elegant package or a brand as an aggregator. So often a very, I think, overlooked role, but a critical role in terms of how we see the importance of the industry rolling out over the next decade and why brands are so critical. Another thing that's kind of interesting is if you look over here, you see on the top row, you can sort of see the traditional role of media. And in the old world, everything neatly works and jumps from one box to the next. If you go to the bottom screen and you see the digital media, well, things are getting a lot more complicated. And things are changing. And the elegance of this, of the flow between the different boxes are beginning to get scrambled. So by point of example, if you imagine now a YouTube user or a young kid in his garage, what he's able to do is he's able to leapfrog these two center boxes. He's able to create content in the box on the left and send content right to someone's device. So this is a profound impact on how we look at our world and some of the adjustments and the things that we are all going to have to address. I think Paul talked about over the top. Vivek addressed that too. These are profound implications on our business. Can people cut out a distributor? Is there a way of circumventing the traditional flow of media? So this is a lot of the area that I spend my time thinking about and trying to identify and trying to get my hands around what that means for our business and how do we protect our content and how do we still create brands and aggregation and how do we create value around that but still understand that today's consumer is not so sympathetic to the traditional way we've ran our business. Another question that I get a lot is free TV dead? Often a question that's asked. People have written it the obituary already, and they talk about audience fragmentation. They talk about a single revenue stream, advertising. Is it stable? 2008, 2009 really put that to the test As you saw, a lot of free TV advertisers, their revenue stream plummet. Multiple devices, shouldn't we be scared? Is there really a role for free TV with everyone with cell phones and online and the iPad now? And I guess my simple answer is it is way too early to write the obituary for free TV. Free TV is alive, it is healthy, and it is well. And in fact, I'll even go out on a limb and say that I think there's a really rosy future for free television. So why do I believe this, and why do I think this is such an important? The first thing is that there's a phrase we use a lot around Disney, which is the consumer will always go to the best available screen. So if you're sitting at your home and you have your mobile phone to your left and you've got your iPad to your right, or you've got your digital device, but in the living rooms your big 42-inch television. At the end of the day, if you're going to watch soccer, if you're going to watch the World Cup, my bet is that you're going to pick the large screen. So the fact that the screen is large, the fact that it's present, the fact that it's in a social environment, my personal opinion is it'll always be the default choice. So from that perspective, I think television and free TV is in a good spot. But the other thing is that what free TV does as well, if you look on the left, first of all, it's an audience aggregator. That's a very, very valuable tool in today's market. With today's fragmentation and people talking about a fragmented market, our perspective is that the aggregation of an audience is even more of a premium than it ever had 10, 15, 20 years ago. How do you collect, in the United States, how do you collect 100 million people around a single event, whether it's a sporting event like the Super Bowl or the Academy Awards or American Idol, which is a big popular show in our part of the world. So that the ability to aggregate large-scale audiences is still is at a premium, and I would argue more of a premium today than it's ever been. And that really ties around event programming, which is what one of the other things that that we at ABC Network in the United States focus on is, and I would assume other people like TVB and others also think about how do we create event programming that can aggregate audiences. The other thing is uniquely local. Free television still has that touch with the consumer. The ability to affect politics, the ability to affect local news, the ability to do local coverage. So it still plays a very important role there. Original production, content. Remember that a lot of the content that is actually on the pay TV networks, well, where did it originate from? Right, it originated on free television. So a lot of our big shows, like Grey's Anatomy, Lost, these were shows that were originated and played out first on free TV. So if you look at the ecosystem of television, free TV plays a very critical role. Advertising reach, advertisers are still very, very, they're still seeking large audiences. It's still, yes, there's a lot of sexiness around being able to target and uniquely target different audiences, and there's value there. But advertisers they love the ability of being able to go and put a single message out there, especially when they're talking big brands, introducing a Lexus or talking about a new consumer product out there. There's nothing more effective than going out wide. And finally, the second revenue stream is, free TV gets criticized a lot for being a single, it's a one-trick pony. Free TV is now in the United States is going through a series of discussions around the retransmission, which is basically looking at going out to the cable systems and the operators and the satellite providers and getting paid now for the content they delivered. So, there's the perspective is that this is valuable content, this is content that has a value, and that, the content provider should be paid for that. So a lot of these economic models that traditionally relied solely on advertising are also beginning to change. Devices. So devices are looking, there's clearly a plethora of devices now. They're beginning to spawn all different kinds of shapes and, colors and flavors. I'll just take a very, very simple perspective. Our perspective is that every device has a role, but there's also different consumer expectations of different devices. And these are simplified examples, and there's always variances on these perspectives. But if you look on the left from the right, you can see the TV is still a good 4 hours. Someone can sit in front of the TV for 4 hours, not feel strained, not have their eyes hurting, and it's a relaxing physical position. The computer is really more, in our perspective, more of a 2-hour work experience. It really functions more in a work environment. Yes, there are people who watch content online, and there's a valuable role for that. But I would still argue people are going to defer to the large screen if they're looking for long-term viewing experiences. I'll move over to the mobile. A lot of our mobile content that's available, we're seeing people consume content in bite-sized pieces, 3 minutes, 7 minutes. You know, I have kids, they do watch half-hour shows on their mobile, but I think that's generally the anomaly. Most people are looking at their mobile device as a means of catch-up, a means of grabbing content while they're on the bus, in between, catching a meeting. And then the iPad, which is kind of a lot of questions marks about iPad, because we don't really know where it fits in the ecosystem yet. We know it's valuable. We know there's a good role for it. I think it's still too early to judge, but iPad could be something really interesting. It could span between both the mobile and it could sit somewhere between the mobile and the computer in terms of the duration of people might want to consume content. Maybe they can consume content for 30 minutes, an hour. But it's also uniquely mobile, too. So it's maybe something they could bring with them. So there's still a lot of questions right now about where that fits in. But again, as we look at devices, we also think about the consumer experience and how the consumer, how we might change or evolve our content in order to hit the right device. One other thing I will say, too, is just an aside, is that I think the big revolution here really is credited to Apple. I think Apple has changed. Devices used to be just a dumb terminal. It was a box and an on switch and off switch. And what Apple has done and what Steve Jobs has single-handedly done is they have made the device manufacturers an active participant in content. So think about that for a second. It's fairly profound. But if people never used to look at their device as a content experience. It was just simply something I picked up to use to make a phone call or something to watch a movie. Now, for the first time, what Steve Jobs has done is he's created an entertainment experience through a device. When people buy an iPad, they're excited, they're enthusiastic about it. They consider that entire experience entertainment. So that, I think, and now, of course, you've got copycats, you've got other companies now trying to do that, but that's a profound concept. I'm getting the nod. I'm going to speed it up.
I'm just agreeing with you.
Okay. Good. Okay, next is the consumer patterns. What I think we really try to illustrate here is I'm using an example of Mary in Australia. She's about 7 years old. She's a huge Disney fan, wouldn't you guess? Favorite show is Hannah Montana. She goes to school. What I bring up Mary here is because Mary's our new boss. She is the people that we all report to because she is going to decide exactly how to consume content in the future. She's going to decide where we consume content. She's going to decide how we consume content. So I look out the room and I think, oh gosh, we're all in our ties and we're in our suits and we're all running the digital media business. That's not true. She's the one who's running the digital media business, and she's the one who's going to be dictating in the future how we look at content, how we consume it. And by the way, we're having to adjust fast and rapidly to appeal to Mary. What Mary does is she might, and I use Foxtel, one of our partners in Australia, as an example, she might catch Hannah Montana on television. She might then move to the Fox Download product because she wanted to catch another episode that she missed. And then finally, when Mom scurries her out the door, she might want to catch the last episode or a last segment on her mobile phone. So Mary is saying, I have no respect anymore for linear. You can't tell me when to watch it. I'm going to tell you when I'm watching it. And by the way, I'm going to tell you how much I'm going to pay for it. Now, that's a hard concept for us to get around, too, because that's how we make it. But so the consumers today are in charge. And I think that's one of the things that we at the Walt Disney Company have a healthy respect for the consumer and having to adapt and mold and change our business models in order to appeal to them. Business model. Okay, so in light of that last slide, what kind of business models are out there? And how do we adjust? How do we make money? How do we as content providers make money? Well, as I encourage you to moving from left to right, we look at the business models falling into three discrete buckets. Subscription, which is the charging of a monthly fee. Transactional, which would be a single transaction in order to get one piece of content, similar to maybe like an iTunes model, or the advertising model. Now, all these different models have both pros and cons. And our job at Disney Media Distribution is to try to figure out which of these models works. And our belief is that there is no right answer. So we look at this grid here and we scratch our head and we figure, okay, where's the right answer? Is it behind door number 3? It's not. We don't know. We have to adjust and adapt our models to the consumer, to the technology, and to the content. And I'd be happy in question time if people want to throw out different ideas about which model serves for what device. But if you look on for the reason we like the subscription model, it's predictable. Every month you get a annual fee or a monthly fee, and that's probably why PCCW likes being in the IPTV business. It's also a single sale process. You sell them once. You don't have to continually sell the consumer. Once they've agreed to become a monthly subscriber, that's an annuity, and that's a really comfortable thing. Now we can all sleep well at night. The cons are that subscriptions require a credit card often. Now that can be very hard if someone's on the go or on their mobile phone and they're trying to get their credit card out and they're fumbling. So there's some real challenges about whether subscription models work on certain devices. And of course, revenues are capped on the subscription model. Once you've agreed to a flat model, well, if you have a hit show, you can't go, oh, remember that fee we charged? We might just want to nudge it up 10%. It doesn't work that way. So there's not the upside that you might capitalize. On the subscription model, on the transactional model, however, hits can be huge. So if you have a hit show or a hit movie or a hit on iTunes and people want to download millions of copies, there's enormous upside there. So on the subscription side, you mitigate some of that upside. But on the transactional side, the more popular it is, the more people are going to buy, the more revenue you get. Also on the transactional side, consumer data. We love seeing that. When you're seeing the actual transaction on a transaction basis, you can find out when they're buying them, why they're buying the content, how much content they're buying. And that really feeds our research group. It really helps us identify which content's working and not. On the cons on the transactional side, you've got a constant sales cycle. You're always trying to sell. You're always trying to sell the next product. And you've got lumpy revenues. And then on the advertising, finally, you still have, on the pro side, you still have large dollars looking for placement. So you've still got big revenues looking for placement. You have improved efficiency with advertising now because of all the different kinds of technologies that allow you to target. But on the downside, market fluctuation. When the market tanks, advertising goes down. And of course, you've got fragmentation, so it's hard to reach broad audiences. And finally, accountability. And no one likes to be accountable. And when you talk to the advertisers now, they want accountability. They want to know who they reached, how they reached, when they watched it, did they watch it. And that's a tough standard to meet often. So I'll just show an example of one of our shows, Grey's Anatomy. Of those fans of Grey's Anatomy, you'd appreciate this. I just use this as an example to illustrate some of the key points that I made before. But Grey's Anatomy, our network show. Now look at all the different multi-platforms it's available on in the United States. It's on ABC, which is a broadcast network. It's on VOD through IPTV, Verizon, for example, and Time Warner. It's on DVR, which is obviously the hardware that sits alongside your cable box. It's on Hulu. It's on ABC.com. It's on iPad. It's on mobile. It's on iTunes, and it's on DVD. So if I had showed this slide 10 years ago, it would have, or 15, 20 years ago, it would be profoundly different. Maybe you would have one or two bullet points there. So look at how the world has changed. This is one of our top shows available across so many different types of different distributors. TV is still our biggest audience. So if you combine the top two, broadcast and VOD, it's still 90% of our audience is watching that show on TV. And I think, Vivek, you pointed out some of that. The top line revenue is still small. Now I'm really going to speed it up. 20% of our audience, by the way, watched this on DVR. So that was a big impact. So in other words, 20% of the audience actually watched it on their hard drive as opposed to through broadcast. And then finally, all these business models are available. How do we make sense of all this world? I'm getting the signal now, so I'm going to push through this. Well, I'm not sure if we have all the answers, but this is kind of how we think of the world. Moving from left to right, first we have to have the technology and the platform. We have to make sure if there's no technology and platform, we can't move to the next space. Secondly, do the consumers want it? People often ignore that. They've got the technology. If the technology is there, we assume the consumer wants it. Not necessarily true. The consumer's got to want the content. Do we have the product? And then finally, is there a business model? People often put the business model at the front. We're not doing anything unless we have a business model. Not true. Let's figure out these other stages first, and the business model will come. And I'll leave you with the Survivor's Guide to Digital Media, the stuff that we always remind ourselves as we think about the space. Number one, experiment and try new things, because if you don't, you'll never learn. Number 2, fail fast. That's the rule of the internet today, is don't take 5 to 6 years to figure something out. Fail quickly, adjust, anchor, adjust, and then move on to the next project. Think proactively, not defensively. There's an enormous amount of conservatism, we believe, in the digital media space. People are very, very worried about cannibalization. I would tend to put cannibalization as one of my low priorities. Look what happened to the music business and their fear and where it got them. So think proactively. Finally, build brands and nurture them. That's one of the things that Walt Disney Company does so well, and I'm so proud to be working at the company, is because we spend so much time on brands. And then finally, always put the customer first. And if you do that, you can't go wrong.